Climate change is a long-term change of the Earth's temperature or climate. Although different places can have different climates, usually it is most likely warm and dry in the summer and cool and wet in winter. But climate change is when the usual weather and temperature rises. The rise in temperature happens when huge quantities of greenhouse gases are emitted into our atmosphere. Climate change begins with the greenhouse effect. Some of the infrared radiation produced from the sun passes through the atmosphere. Then the radiation is absorbed and re-emitted in all directions by greenhouse gas molecules, such as carbon dioxide and water vapor. Like a blanket, the heat bounces within the atmosphere and warms the Earth's surface. This is the natural greenhouse effect. However, because we constantly burn up fossil fuels to heat up homes, power industries, and run our vehicles and other different transports, we emit harmful gases into our atmosphere, producing kilotons of greenhouse gases. Because we cut down more than 50,000 trees a minute, we get rid of our natural carbon storages, meaning that the carbon dioxide that we produce has nowhere else to go, except towards the atmosphere. Because we build huge farms, grow crops, breed animals so we can sustain and enhance human life, we release greenhouse gases like methane through livestock. According to a 2006 agricultural study, they claim that the livestock produces more greenhouse gas emissions, as measured in CO2 equivalent, 18%, than transport. As a result, the globe is getting warmer than it was before big industries came into play. Studies show that the average global temperature rose by 0.74 degrees Celsius from 1906 to 2005. Now that society has developed and technology has changed, every year the sea temperature increases by 0.18 degrees Celsius. Climate scientists predict that by the year 2050, the sea level will rise by 58 centimeters. It doesn't sound like a lot, but even the smallest change in our climate can create devastating disasters across the globe. Every single nation will soon be affected by climate change, but some countries in the Pacific Islands are already facing consequences of climate change already. The Pacific region of the world, including countries like Kiribati, Hawaii, and Fiji, are on the front line and are desperate for help. Scattered across the largest ocean, there is a country called Kiribati. Kiribati is the home of 112,000 people with the average birth rate of 3 children per woman. The problem is that the quality of life that the babies are born into is terrible due to the issues that are linked to climate change. Kiribati's major issue that they are currently facing is sea level rise. They are witnessing king tides that last up to 4 days. Kiribati is only 1 to 2 meters above sea level, and the fact that they are seeing waves that are stronger than things that man can build can be extremely scary for the people who live there. Because of the rise in sea level, they are affected terribly by difficult weather events like storms, cyclones, and floods. Life is harder for the people in Kiribati. They lack sleep because they are constantly alert for other dangerous weather events, and they also lack food and clean, fresh water due to the fact that the country is very small and narrow. Fresh water becomes especially scarce during floods and storms. Last of all, because of the rise in sea level, the water goes into the houses where families live. The people from the Tubuganako Lagoon have already left their island to go to their mainland because they have lost 200 meters of their land. It has been said that the majority of the population's infrastructure are within 300 meters of the coast. Because of the flooding, although people are not wanting to, families are forced to migrate for their own safety. We lost 30 to 40% of coral reefs over the past 50 years due to pollution and overfishing, but now because of climate change and because of El Niño's warm water, Hawaii will lose their beautiful coral reefs due to coral bleaching. Coral bleaching is when the water is too warm for the corals. The algae attached to the coral leaves due to the heat of the water. The loss of corals means that the part of the food chain will be destroyed, the home to sea life will be gone, and natural barriers for storm surges will be lost. 3,000 kilometers from Kiribati, we see another country that suffers from climate change. Hawaii's waters are getting warmer, which means coral reefs and marine ecosystems are getting harmed. And sometimes the naturally occurring phenomenons, El Nino and La Nina, causes average water temperatures to vary. El Nino is when trade winds are weakened and when warm water moves on towards the eastern Pacific, where Hawaii is located. This causes the western Pacific islands to have droughts and food water shortages, whereas the eastern Pacific sees more cyclones due to their energy from the warm water. And La Nina is when trade winds are stronger and pushes the warm water over to the west. Lastly, climate change is likely going to increase some health threats in Hawaii. Like Fiji, there will most likely be more mosquito-borne diseases due to the temperature rising. Children, the elderly, the sick, and poor will be more exposed to these harmful threats. Fiji is a land of sandy beaches, located not far away from Vanuatu are 320 tropical volcanic islands, 110 of them being habited. Fiji does seem to be a paradise, with the bright sun, the white sand, the clear blue sea, but in fact that is not the case anymore. Last year, as of 2017, Fiji witnessed one of the most destructive cyclones. Cyclone Winston was the second most strongest landfalling cyclone recorded in history. With agriculture ruined and with houses being destroyed, this cyclone left tens of thousands of people homeless. Crops that had taken more than 10 years to grow was all destroyed within 3 hours. It is said that the storm was very unusual. Instead of approaching Fiji from the west, Winston moved from the east. As detailed by the professor Tom Yulesman, several elements including climate change and the weather phenomenon El Nino all potentially played a role in fueling this powerful storm. Looking into the future, the impacts of climate change on the Pacific Islands will only increase. Studies show that destructive storms will only get worse as oceans get warmer and weather patterns become more severe. This means no homes, no food and water for these islands. It is really true that the people who make the least contribution to climate change are the first ones to suffer. Is climate change real or is it just hot air? 97% of climate scientists believe that climate change is happening because of us. But that is only one side of the spectrum. What do other people think about climate change? Kiribati locals understand that climate change is real and is affecting them right now. At first they believe that their God will not allow their island to disappear because God will protect their land. But after seeing the beaches fade away because of the rise in sea level, activists and students from a nearby school decided to find out what was causing all of this problem. Once they had found out that climate change was happening because of the big industries from other nations, they were surprised. Kiribati locals are now convinced and concerned about what is about to happen to their island in a couple years' time. Although Kiribati is a small country and their voices may not be heard, they are trying their hardest to tell the entire globe about what is happening to them. They are setting an example to the bigger countries by sacrificing their tuna industry. By doing this, they hope to see more changes around the future. Luckily for them, they have a chocolate company on their side named Mars. After the company heard about what was going on in the world, they put themselves in other people's shoes. They became aware that islands in the Pacific were facing major problems, issues like poverty, water stress, and climate change. Mars is now taking a new approach to address these challenges with a plan. They believe it is a time to embrace a sense of urgency by setting goals in 3 key areas: to reduce our environmental impacts and to help billions of people and their pets lead healthier, happier lives. On the other side of the spectrum, we see America and their president, Donald Trump. Donald Trump himself is a climate change denier. Because he is so against climate change, he has pulled out of the Paris Climate Agreement, which deals with greenhouse gas emissions, mitigation, adaptation, and finance. Trump has instructed his staff at U.S. Department of Agriculture, also known as USDA, to avoid using the term climate change and instead using the word weather extremes. According to a survey in 2016, it is said that 48% of Americans believe that climate change is happening because of human activity, and a similar share says that the Earth is warming up from natural causes and that there is no scientific evidence of warming. That is 115 million Americans that don't believe that climate change is because of us. But why won't they believe it? Psychologist John Tooby says that humans react to things more when it is personal to them, or if it is changing their environment and what's around them. We can see why half of the Americans don't believe in climate change. Number one, they have not seen the consequences and have not been in a hard situation like the one suffering in the Pacific. And number two, although they are aware about what is going on out in the cruel world, but because it is not directly impacting them, they do not seem to care about the islanders, because of the fact that it is not affecting them personally. We can see on the other side of the spectrum we have people that don't really care about climate change because they believe that it is a naturally occurring thing. But on the other hand, we can clearly tell that locals in Kiribati and the company Mars are willing to sacrifice something that they have to give a message to the world. Kiribati locals are trying to protect their island in many different ways so that they will survive through the rising sea levels. Locals from the island are planting mangroves near the coastline so that they act as wave barriers. The main reason why they use mangroves is because of how cheap it is and how fast they grow. They are also constantly replacing and building seawalls to protect themselves from the king tides. Although the seawalls are not good for the environment, because the nation is very small, they don't really produce any greenhouse gases or release toxins into the water compared to bigger nations like New Zealand. New Zealand has recently set a target on reducing New Zealand's greenhouse gas emissions. The 2030 climate change target was set in December 2016 in Paris to establish a new international climate change agreement under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. This is the Paris Climate Agreement. New Zealand's current target is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 30% below 2005 levels by 2030. And how are we going to achieve this? New Zealand is planning to install windmills to get energy instead of burning fossil fuel, and by setting vehicle fuel efficiency standards, encouraging the use of low or zero emission vehicles, and prioritizing walking. These are all possible ways New Zealand can reach the 2030 climate target. A carbon footprint is the amount of carbon dioxide released into the atmosphere by someone. Everyone has a carbon footprint, either big or small. What things can we do to reduce our ecological footprint? 1. Live closer to your work or school. If you live close to your school or work, you are more likely to walk or cycle there. It may be difficult to get a home quite close to your destination, but the closer the better. Stay away from the cars as much as possible. 2. Consume less. Every time you buy something, do you eat all of it? By cutting back on consumption, you are cutting back on packages as well. It's much easier to go shopping and buy everything you see on the shelf, but next time think eco-friendly. Put the food aside and cut down on carbon dioxide. 3. And the simplest out of all is switching your lights or electricity cables off when not in use. Believe it or not, an average American spends more money on electricity to power devices when off than when on. Next time you need to go somewhere, make sure that switch is off and don't spend all your money on power bills. Climate change is real and is a serious issue. It is a problem that the world is going through right now. Climate change is happening because of us, because of you, because of everyone on Earth. We can't just blame it on the big industries that put out kilotons of gases into our atmosphere. We will not solve global climate change by hitting that delete button. It's up to you to make a difference.